Good evening. I would like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, August 1st, 2017, and the Portland Board of Public Education is meeting at City Hall and Council Chambers. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Seeliger. Ms. Vendel.
Here.
Ms. Hatzenbuehler.
Here.
Ms. Davis. Ms. Thompson.
Here.
Ms. Morioni.
Here.
Mr. Eder. Mr. Rodriguez.
Presente.
And Ms. Donato, Ms. Farah, Ms. Hassan, and Mr. Siegel are all absent, and Chair Terraro.
Here. And I do understand that some of our students are with Seeds of Peace. And Mr. Eder and Ms. Seeliger did let me know that they have obligations tonight, that they won't be able to make it. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome back, board members. We had July off. I hope everybody had a nice half of the summer so far and got some time to rest and have some fun as well. If you remember when we left, the last time we met, a few of us, Superintendent Botana and Ms. Vendel and I were just about to head out to a conference. It was the conference for the Institute of Educational Leadership, which was held in San Francisco this year. The conference was all about family and community engagement and community schools. We had a contingent from Portland this year. I think there were 6 of us total.
It was more.
More, 8 maybe. 8 of us, including the mayor, Councilor Pius Ali, Sue Olafson, the PEA president. We had Sophie Payson from Portland High and Kevin Brewster from Reiki. We had a great time. We learned a lot. For several of us, this was not our first time going, so we've been able to kind of really engage with this work, which is very much in line with our goals of whole student and equity. So we're really excited this year to kind of regroup around this work and bring back what we've learned in a more sort of consolidated process so that we can see how we can apply it to Portland Public Schools. So there will be more on that in the future. The other thing I just wanted to briefly report and let board members know is that on our meeting on September 5th, we're going to be doing an organizational report. Our staff is going to be presenting kind of the organizational structure of Portland Public Schools, and we're going to be inviting candidates that have qualified for the ballot at that point and are potentially new to be joining us, and that will be an opportunity for them to learn about Portland Public Schools as well. That concludes my remarks for tonight, and we don't have a report of the students tonight. I would turn it over to the report of the superintendent.
Thank you, Chair. I hope that everybody enjoyed their July recess. It sure seemed to go by a lot faster than I remember July going by last year. But it's great to be back. This board meeting marks the start of my second year as superintendent of the Portland Public Schools, and I'm excited to begin this year. I'm deeply indebted to all of the board for their patience and commitment to helping me succeed in this role, and your support and guidance has been terrific over this year. Especially grateful to former Chair Marnie Morioni and to Chair Terraro over this past year, because your commitment to helping to shape our agendas and direction has been a huge support to me and to our team. I also want to recognize my team, Assistant Superintendent Jeannie Crocker, of course. She's been my strongest mentor and supporter this year. She's so wise and committed to the district, and the depth of her understanding of the district belies the fact that she's only been with us for 3 years when it feels like she's been here for 30-plus years. I also want to recognize Janet Tobias, without whom I would probably be lost every day. She's made working at PPS doable, and she's kept me laughing through the whole process, and that's been tremendous. I've built a solid executive team, and I'm excited to have you meet them and understand our organizational structure. As Chair Trevorrow mentioned, we're planning an in-depth introduction to the team and their portfolios on September 5th, and at that time, as Chair Trevorrow mentioned, we hope that we'll be joined by the individuals who have submitted nomination papers to be on the board, because I think this is a great opportunity for them to learn about the way that we're organized and what the big work of the district is for this coming year, which is what we hope to do there. I would also take a minute to thank members of the Portland Legislative Delegation for their hard work on behalf of the Portland Public Schools this spring. As everyone here knows, when we received our EPS projections based on the governor's proposed budget, PPS stood to lose over $2 million in state revenue. Coupled with our standard cost escalation, this created a dramatic shift in revenue, requiring a substantial number of reductions in order for us to keep our tax increase to the City Council's stated goal of 2.5%. Early in that process, we were reassured by members of our legislative delegation that they would fight hard to ensure that the governor's proposed budget was not enacted and that funding would increase for education. As you know, we took a risk and assumed some of those projections into our budget planning, and I'm happy to report that the resulting budget met and exceeded those projections. So I'm incredibly grateful for our legislators for their work on behalf of the children, families, and staff of the Portland Public Schools. We're better positioned to continue to improve the outcomes for our students, thanks largely to their work. I would also like to extend heartfelt condolences to the family of John Tavanian, who passed away last week at the age of 91. Mr. Tavanian was a longtime teacher and truant officer for the Portland Public Schools and a strong supporter of the Portland High School Athletic Department. I also understand he was a teacher to Ms. Thompson, member of the board. So we obviously reach out to the Tavanian family with our deepest sympathies. So next, I would like to invite Executive Director of Budget and Finance, Alicia Gardner, to provide a little more detailed update on the state budget and its implications for our work. This will include a timeline for the next steps in determining how to allocate additional funding from the state. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Alicia. Yep.
So we're going to start and just remind us of sort of how we got to the point that we're at right now, and a real brief overview of what's next in order to accept these funds and make an amendment to the FY 2018 budget. So as you may recall, our initial proposed budget had a 14% reduction in state aid. As Superintendent Botana said, it was $2 million over FY 17, and it was based on projected changes to the EPS formula. We then chose to further reduce our budget by $420,000, as this is the amount that we anticipate that we will lose due to the state certified seed, and that's due to Medicare billing, and the state withholds EPS from us because they believe that they're paying that out in Medicare. So the Finance Committee approved a revenue adjustment of $1 million because we believed that the legislature was not going to let the governor's proposed changes to EPS into the final formula. So our final revenue was just over $14 million, which was still a $1.1 million reduction over FY 2017. So any change in the budget that we were expecting, we needed at least $1 million to cover our budget. So in the end, we received $16.2 million. So what did that mean for us? That was $2.7 million higher than the governor's proposed budget. It was $2 million higher than our Portland Public Schools approved budget. So we still need to take that revenue number and reduce it by the seed reduction, so that's $420,000. So we have $1.7 million more in revenue than what we have budgeted. And we think it's really important to understand the changes to the formula because these changes will be enacted in FY19 as well coming next year. So I just want to go through a few things that highlight what happened. So system administration in FY17, we received $233 per Portland Public Schools student. And as you might recall, in the governor's proposed budget, this was changed to $0. So the final budget has $135 per student. Our understanding is next year that amount will be similar to $135 per student, but there will be a set aside of about $45 to $46, I think, per student if you participate in sort of a regionalization. So that's something that we're going to have to consider going forward, that if we don't choose to do some sort of regionalization, that we could lose another $46 and probably receive around $90 per student next year. So we were very fortunate that Title I revenue was not reduced from our final formula number. And in response to that, the teacher ratios did increase. So last year we had 16-to-1 teachers at the middle school, our 15 students to 1 teacher at the high school, 100-to-1 ed techs at the elementary and middle, and 250-to-1 at the high school. And you can see those were drastically changed in the upcoming year. Not as much at the teacher level, but in the ed techs. It's now 114-to-1 at the elementary level, 312-to-1 at the middle level, and 316 at the high school level. So we did lose a significant portion of revenue on just salary subsidy right off the bat. And that was in response to adding the Title I revenues back into the budget. There was something called a declining enrollment adjustment that essentially took our enrollment over 3 years, and if we were losing an average number of students over that 3 years, they added those back into our subsidy formula. They got rid of that adjustment. So last year we received another $540,000 due to that, and essentially that was lost this year. So there's no more declining enrollment adjustment. So the declining enrollments going forward will be felt in that year that it's happening, as opposed to spreading out over 3 years like it did previously. This next section was very beneficial to Portland. We receive another 15% in subsidy for all of our students who are free and reduced lunch. And last year it was 55.96%. It did go up slightly to 56.25% for FY18, but we're receiving another 5%, so 20% in subsidy, which resulted in another $1.3 million to Portland Public Schools this year. Most of the districts that benefited from the new state budget, you'll see were districts like Lewiston and Sanford and Portland, and this had a lot to do with that, was the disadvantaged student weights. Another new formula item was targeted funds for pre-K students only, and Portland received $78,000 for that. And then the final beneficial change to the formula was under the FY17 EPS formula, the mill rate was $8.30 per thousand. So essentially, that said, this is what we think that the city of Portland should contribute. And even though we grew in assessed value, our contribution really only rose by $300,000, which really helped us as that allocation and the contribution really grew further apart, and that's how we ended up with more money. The governor's proposed budget, the mill rate was higher, so the final mill rate was $8.19, so it went down over last year. What we're anticipating For next year, I'm sorry, that should say FY 2018 mill rate of 819. So for what we're thinking is going to happen for FY 19, they're going to put more money sort of into the pot, so that mill rate should go down again next year. If everyone can recall, we've talked about this at Finance Committee earlier this year. We did receive $148 million in a jump of assessed value for FY 17, so that's going to start affecting us in the FY 19 year. So a reduction in that mill rate will really help even out that assessed value jump that we're going to see next year. So after we sort of understand the positives and negatives about what's changed in the formula, we essentially have to decide what to do next. And in order to make any changes, we basically have to go through the same budget process that we went through. So we'll bring a recommendation to the Finance Committee, who will recommend it to the board. You'll have 2 readings. It'll go to the City Council, and actually, I've discussed this with the Deputy City Manager, that it will go to City Council, it will then go to Finance Committee, and it will go back to City Council. We'll do Finance Committee after the first read, just to have a better timing. So we do not need an additional referendum. Had we not approved any changes to the spending, we would have had to go back to referendum again after this process. So it was very beneficial that we did that. Because we did that, it's going to allow us to have a larger range of decision-making abilities for what we're going to do with these funds. And so just so you realize, what we're looking at for a timeline is that we think the earliest that we're going to be having a final approval is the beginning of October. So that's certainly weighing in our minds while we're going to be making a recommendation of what would be good use of these funds for FY 18. And the options that we have for this new revenue, we have 6 options. So obviously there's the 3 options that the voters authorized. So there's tax relief, reserve funds, and then 2, 3, 4, and 5 are sort of the spending. So those are sort of our spending options. So we can restore cuts that we made to the 18 budget. We can restore investments that we ended up cutting out of the 18 budget. We could make one-time expenditures such as capital items or buses or technology, or we could do pure budget additions that are new requests that we hadn't considered before this process. So these are the things that we're going to be working internally on developing a recommendation and bringing forward our recommendation to you.
Can you go back one slide?
Yes.
Back one slide from that, the timeline one. So I think it's important to sort of underscore that we are looking to meet with the chair of the Finance Committee, our Finance Committee and the City Council Finance Committee, so that we start from a joint direction in terms of the parameters. And so that's our first step. So we're looking to do that between now and next Tuesday, when we have to bring a set of recommendations to the Finance Committee. So I think that it's important for everybody to understand that we want to start from that basis of common understanding, so that we can move through those steps in a smooth sequence. So
that's what I had for you, and if anyone has any questions.
I just wanted to make a request. On these, when you bring forward the recommendations next Tuesday to Finance and then moving forward all the way to us, I think the sticky part was when we were receiving investment strategies, when we were working on the budget this past season, we didn't have a lot of detailed information as to why. We had a lot of questions, it seemed, the board did, around why and what does that mean that we're not going to be doing if we do this and things like. So my only request would be, as we move forward, as you're working on recommendations, if you could really help us lay out again the why part behind it, and why this and not that. That's my request. Thank you.
Ms. Thompson.
Thank you. I have a few questions. One on the slide, the changes to formula around targeted funds for pre-K, and you talked about targeted funds were for K through 12 pupils only, and then we're getting pre-K targeted funds added of $78,000. Can we use that for, because we're remaining flat this year while the review is done, can we use that for existing pre-K? It doesn't have to be to add to.
Correct. It would essentially offset what we're paying local only right now for pre-K.
Okay. And maybe I missed it, or maybe I'm just still on summer mode. I thought there was a part of it that we had to do some of the money for tax relief. So how is that working all into?
Right. So this year, the suggestion was, and the requirement was, that 50% of the new money would need to go to tax relief, and 50% of the new money could be for other specified purposes, unless you already had approval from your voters to spend the money or do something else. And essentially, our referendum authorized 3 options. So we essentially don't have to comply with the specified rules because we have authorization from our voters to do a choice of those 3 things with the funds. I believe next year, for FY19, that it's going to be a hard requirement that 50% goes to tax relief, but the DOE hasn't issued any guidance of how they're going to implement that.
Okay, oh, sorry.
Quickly on that does not mean that we're not doing
Right.
tax relief. It just means that we're technically not required to do it. So.
Correct.
And the last question I have, and you talked about options for new revenue, and I know that I've talked to the superintendent about it, and it's been, all over the place, and near dear to my heart are the health centers. And so I guess while we're weaving all of this in, that I want to know exactly, what we're doing there, because I'll have a hard time adding new positions or making anything new until we have health care for the students. So I want to know if the city's working with us, the state's, it is a cut from the state. So in the options for new revenue, we didn't talk about restoring cuts from the state, and that's a big one to me and many people, is the health centers. So before we start talking, new positions, I'm hoping that we have a conversation around the health centers and what we're going to do there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Moving into report of the secretary. Consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of June 20th, 2017. Is there a motion? Ms. Thompson, seconded by Mr. Rodriguez. Are there any questions on the meeting minutes? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the meeting minutes? Seeing none, is there any board discussion on the meeting minutes? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes of June 20th, 2017, please indicate. It's unanimous. We don't have report of the committees this evening. Moving into consent items. Would the superintendent please read the items into consent?
The Bayside Learning Community received a donation of office furniture from Lincoln Financial Group of Portland. Thank you very much. East End Elementary School received 5 boxes of peanut butter and jelly from Bangor Savings Bank of Portland. Peanut butter is good. Paths received a 1997 Toyota 4Runner from Daniel and Melissa Riley of Portland. And Ocean Avenue Elementary School received a cash donation to purchase books for their Starting Strong reading program from the Elizabeth Wadsworth chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution of Scarborough. So thank you very much to all of them.
Moving into old business. Consideration and action to revise policy JICC Student Bus Conduct Code. Is there a motion? Ms. Morioni, seconded by Ms. Davis. Would the superintendent like to speak to the motion?
Sure. This policy addresses student conduct on our buses. It was developed under the guidance of the Operations Committee this past year and has been reviewed by Council. And I'm going to ask Transportation Director Fred Barlow to come up to speak to you a little bit about the essence of the policy change. Fred?
Thank you, Superintendent Batanas. So We have a policy right now that has some issues, and that's why we were asking you to consider something that's a lot more relevant to where we are in 2017. The current policy has some disconnects. The way it's written, a child or a student can do something on the school bus and do something in the classroom, and they're parallel systems. There's a disconnect between what goes on in the classroom and in the school and what goes on in the school bus, and we're looking to bridge that so that the child's school day really does start when he or she boards the school bus in the morning. The current policy, besides the disconnect, it's our job, it is our mission to get students to school to learn. And the current policy talks to what happens about getting students removed from the school bus. We want to keep students on the school bus, but we also want to hold them accountable for their behavior, as would be the case if something happens inside of a school building. And the new language that we are asking that you consider tonight brings a synergy to transportation and the school principals and assistant principals, because the partnership that the new language defines holds the students accountable for their entire school day. It does define certain behaviors that are unique to a school bus. We're more concerned about things flying out the window of our school buses than perhaps is the case within the school building. But that said, I respectfully submit that a fight is a fight regardless of where it occurs. And lastly, we right now have a policy that says that if there's a conduct report, that is one occurrence that counts towards a student's removal from a school bus. What we have been asked from school principals is to help keep small problems small by documenting them and helping the school teams track what goes on the school bus in concert with what goes on in the school buildings. And in doing so, it doesn't count as a strike, if you will, towards getting removed from the bus. And we don't have bus drivers who want to keep the students on their buses not writing students up. So we're attempting to bridge that disconnect. And lastly, in order to keep with the comprehensive plan, the draft that you saw last week did speak to children and child, and it has been updated to read student and students. So that language has been changed to be more in sync. And thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Ms. Thompson?
I just have one for the superintendent. On the draft policy, there was a part, and I didn't take it to be one of Drummond Winston's note, but more so a mandate within the policy where it says, this policy and notice of the accompanying rules shall be published in all school handbooks. And I thought that was a part that would stay in the policy, and that wasn't a note from Drummond and Woodson. It was more saying, this policy, should be in the handbooks, but it was removed from the final version. So I'm just wondering if that's something that someone took as Drummond and Woodson's comment, or was that meant to stay in there?
We discussed that at a recent operations meeting. Would you like to speak to that, Ms. Davis, or would you like me to, or?
I can. What we did was that in the handbooks, there is a reference to the policy without quoting the entire policy. And that's been actually our practice, if I'm remembering correctly, and correct me if I'm remembering wrong. And that we felt that was a better way to approach it than to list the whole policy out, that including it by reference. Because one of the struggles with our handbooks is how detailed do you make them, how lengthy, at what point, do they become almost unreadable because there's so much in there. Some of our students are part of buses, and, that's a part of their way of getting to school, and other students it isn't. So it's incorporated by reference, but without listing the entire policy.
Thank you. That makes complete sense. And when the appropriate time, I just have one slight he, she changing to do they on the second paragraph, so when the appropriate time. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any other questions on Ms. Morioni?
I just have a clarifying question. this is just trying to remember, when we're signing our kids up at the beginning of the year, and we get that huge packet of things that parents signing, and let's say your child is going to be riding the bus, and the parent signs off that they will be following the code of conduct, is that language, that happens, right? Because am I just completely making that up? It's in the packet that parents get, correct?
To the best of my knowledge, yes, we provide that to the schools, and to the best of my knowledge, it is included in the packets. We do not generate that at transportation.
Right.
Hence the
So I guess
qualifier.
somebody may be able to answer this. So what we're going to agree upon tonight, that will be then what a parent signs off on, that they're, in other words, to make sure, it may not be in the handbook of the school, but again, help me understand if we have parents agree that my child will follow this code of conduct. And the student, I think student signs too, yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, and I'll turn to my principal colleagues. I don't believe we have an active consent with the handbook. I believe that the handbook is, there's an expectation that you read it, but there's not an expectation that you take the affirmative signature. So we don't exclude somebody who doesn't sign it. We assume that everybody gets it and everybody reads it. I don't believe that we have a signature.
It's only something I'd love to find out, because I remember signing those, but
Somebody
maybe that's
help
changed over the
me-
years. And maybe it is not happening for high school, because now they're taking the Metro. So I don't know if Casco or anybody else can. Anyhow, let's put it this way. If we still do that, which I think we actually should be doing that I'd love to make sure that that language that we're about to agree upon tonight from the policy will be what the parents do get to read.
Makes sense.
And again, that actually solidifies even more the fact that your child, it just gives it additional leverage about, look, you and your child just signed this, or you signed this at the beginning of the year. It may not be in the handbook, but at least it's something that is addressed.
Regardless of whether it's signed or not, that is what will happen.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I would call for public comment. Is there any public comment on policy JICC? Seeing none, is there any board discussion? Ms. Thompson?
Thank you. I just have a slight change on the second paragraph when it says, once a student boards the bus, and only at that time does he, she. I'd like to change the he, she, do they. So it would read, once a student boards the bus, and only at that time do they become the responsibility of the school system. And remove the does, he, she.
Okay. That's an amendment.
So I have to have a second on that.
Okay, seconded by Ms. Hassenbuehler. Okay. Are there any, yeah, go ahead.
The only reason I'm speaking to it and wanting to, I think as we go through the policies, we're working very diligently in the policy committee on a transgender policy. And so as we go through the new policies, I think it's important that where we have reference to he, she, that we look at that a little bit more closely. And that's what I'm attempting to do here. Thank you.
Ms. Davis?
I think there may be another one. In cases when a student does not conduct himself, it's himself, him, herself properly, and that should be themselves. Because that's a good catch, and I think that is something we want to do. It's just overlooked.
We'll be happy to just do a search, a general search.
And change it to inclusive language. Thank you.
You want the amendment just to be then that all language in reference to he, she will be changed to they, them?
I don't think we can do it for all policies, but for this one in particular.
Right,
Well, that's in
right,
front of
that's
us.
what I meant.
Yeah, to change it to the he, she, to do they, so that it runs correctly.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Any questions on the amendment? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the amendment? Seeing none, is there any other board discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of amending the language to they? It's unanimous. And back to the main motion. Is there any more discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I would call for a vote. All those in favor of revising policy JICC, Student Bus Conduct Code, please indicate. It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Consideration and action to revise policy JICI, Athletic and Co-curricular Code of Conduct for middle and high school students. Is there a motion? Ms. Morioni, seconded by Mr. Rodriguez. Would the superintendent like to speak to the motion?
Gladly. This policy deals with sports and co-curricular conduct requirements, the levels of school performance required to qualify to participate in extracurricular activities, and the consequences for failing to meet those policies. Policy revision was conducted under the leadership of Interim Chief Academic Officer Sharon Prey, who's here for her last hurrah, in the Curriculum Committee. It was part of a broad effort, as you'll recall, to update all of the policies associated with the transition to proficiency-based learning required for the class of 2021. In the course of updating language to conform to the PBL requirements in this particular policy, the committee grappled with issues of practice in implementing the previous policy, and that's what brings us to this. At the June 20th board meeting, Member Thompson raised concerns about several issues. Most salient was a concern that as written, consequences for students failing to meet the academic performance requirements appeared to be harsher than the consequences for students failing to meet the alcohol and drug policy. So at the time, we tabled the approval and brought back a revised policy today. In the packet that you received, you also received a graphic that shows how, in fact, consequences for alcohol and drug use are generally more severe than those for students who are not making the grade. We've also made some further changes to the policy to reflect changes in direction around proficiency-based learning, and we've left the specific requirements for grades. So the way that we did that is that we have left the specific requirements for grades more generic to permit for both proficiency-based and traditional grading, as both are currently used in our schools. We have kept changes that incorporate the habits of work and learning, HOWLS, requirement built into the policy. And we've also, since the original packet that you received, made some additional editorial changes to the policy based on board member comments over the weekend. So with that, I would turn it over to Ms. Prey to review those changes and answer any of the questions that are left unanswered. So, Sharon?
So I believe you outlined quite a bit of that, but additionally, we, based on some feedback that we received from people after the board meeting, we decided to change all of the his/her language to they, to be in keeping with our policy moving forward with our gender equality. We added extended learning opportunities and educational learning experiences, such as college courses and internships, as counted as a course, because there are times when students have a full course schedule, but they may be taking 2 college courses at the university, they may have an internship, and they also may be taking 2 classes at Deering High School. So those will count under the academic eligibility under 2C. We changed the language in the academic eligibility section to provide documentation on day 8 at the end of the day rather than by noon. That gives students a longer period of time to actually provide that documentation. Under letter D in the appeal for disciplinary suspension, we changed the language to 2 to 3 school days for school staff members to respond to families, and we eliminated the words "when possible" and "in a reasonable amount of time." because we felt, after looking at it, that if parents and families only have a couple of days to request an appeal, then we should be really quick to respond. So we wanted to be more precise in terms of our response. And then we noticed, as we talked about in our curriculum ed planning committees when we meet, that every time we look at a policy, we really need to look at the cross-reference policies, because what we found in all of these cross-reference policies, that there were 4 or 5 of them that were actually a different name now than they were when this policy was developed. So if you look at the cross-reference policies, we've now changed all of those to reflect the actual wording for those cross-reference policies. So I think that's kind of it in a nutshell, but if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them for you.
It'll be a team effort.
Okay.
Ms. Morioni?
Can I just also highlight, this was difficult in curriculum, and we worked on it for several months, and appreciate all the staff's work on this. And also, we realized that we were focusing too narrowly on sports instead of also other co-curricular activities. And so we had to go back, and thank you so much, Ms. Prey, for everything, for all your hard work going back. And every time we would move forward a little bit, we had to take a step back, and you had to go back to staff. So I appreciate all of that hard work. So I think where we are now, there's still a few possible bumps, but I think it's looking a lot better than it had previously. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Davis?
In the graphic that we were provided, it looks like the penalties are different for football than for basketball or ice hockey, and is that the case? It would seem that the penalties should be, or why would they be different from sport to sport?
Okay, so if you look at the grid that was given to you previously, I don't know if that's in your current
They don't
packet.
they don't have the grid, so we simplified that. Let me explain it. It is not that there's a difference in the penalties. The penalties for drug and alcohol are tied to a percentage of the season. There's more games in basketball than there are in football, and so that explains it. Where it's for academic purposes, it's tied to a period of time, a week, and again, there's a single game generally in football during 1 week, and there tends to be 2 games in basketball, and so that's the explanation for that.
Ms. Thompson?
Thank you. I want to thank you very, very much, and yourself and the superintendent, for putting forth the changes that you have and listening to the feedback. I do have a few more questions. One is under academic probation. How is this being conveyed and emphasized to the students and their parents and guardians that students have to present written documentation? How is that being rolled out?
That is generally in the handbooks, and also communicated to them by their coaches and the administrators.
At the time of the discipline, there's an explanation of what it is that you need to do to get back into good standing.
Yes.
And in the paragraph below academic probation, it talks about being academically eligible in howls of 3. And my concern with that, as I've expressed, is that we're making a large shift here for families, that your child could make the honor roll, but they may not get 3s in their work habits of work, and therefore it keeps them ineligible. I think this is a major shift for families, and where we're just going into the grading academically 1 through 4, and we're phasing, I know Portland Deering are continuing the 1 through 100, as you and I discussed, Ms. Prey, for academics, and Casco's already doing the 1 through 4, but the part of now, you can't just make the honor roll, you also have to make the house. And I'm wondering, we're already asking families to make a mind shift here of grading differently, and I think the terminology is brand new to a lot of people, and through our conversations that you and I've had, I know that you put out yourself and your staff to go out community-wide and really articulate what the new grading is going to be and what it's all about, and unfortunately, people didn't take advantage of those opportunities. But my concern is that this is a large shift to parents and to students, so I'm just wondering how it came about that we would do it now versus a phase-in approach?
Can I speak to that? Okay. So the habits of work will be implemented in all 3 high schools as well as all 3 middle schools next year. So each of the high schools have created habits of work rubrics and scoring criteria so that the students will know as they enter a course or they enter an educational experience what a 3 will need for them to do. So they will be taught those habits of work in their courses. That's something that we believe that we need to model as teachers. We need to teach it, and we need to be able to measure it, okay? So in order to measure something, you need to have clearly articulated criteria. So for each one of those scoring rubrics numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 3 is what we're shooting for, so each student will be told and taught in each class, these are the things that we expect of you for a 3 in habits of work, and these are the things that we expect of you for a 4. And a 1 would be this and a 2 would be this. So in my opinion, and I'm just one person, and I mentioned this to you today when I talked with you, is that I think that it's easier for teachers to articulate what a scoring criteria rubrics is than for them to kind of subjectively assign an effort grade, like in the past. You know, a lot of times teachers may assign an effort grade to a student that doesn't have much kind of data to support what's giving them that score. At least the scoring criteria will give them a better indication as to what they need to shoot for in order to get that 3. So I think it's important for us as teachers and educators and administrators and parents to talk about habits of work, and we want them to be generalized in our world as we become adults and as we become working, productive citizens. And if we go on to college, we want to make sure that we have strong habits of work so that we're able to attain our goals.
So the new grad policy with the proficiency-based was phased in, it's for the class of 2021, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So I guess when we have debate or further discussion about that, I can talk about that part.
Yep.
Through many things that we do, we have an appeals process, and in this particular policy, it says that the principal's word is final. And I think with a lot of things, that should the parents and student not agree, that they have an opportunity to also reach out to the superintendent or their designee, and where the principals and co-curricular report to the assistant superintendent, I'm wondering if there hasn't been discussion about if there is an appeals process that they don't agree one way or the other with the principal, if there's an avenue in which there's a designee or the superintendent to be able to appeal that to further, because this is saying, once principal says no, you're no.
Yeah, I think we obviously considered that option, and because of the time element that's associated with these decisions, we decided that it just was not practicable to actually have an appeal process for these decisions. So while we normally have appeal processes for things such as long-term, suspensions and expulsions, we don't have those for day-to-day instances because principals have to make those decisions in the moment. And so we're looking at this as the same type of in-the-moment, give appropriate due process and, move on. It's not something that we can build in the level of steps that would be required to have an appeal.
Okay. And I just have two last questions, and I thank you for... Under disciplinary action, it talks about, the last sentence states that the advisor or coach will consult with the athletic co-curricular administrator prior to suspending a student from an activity or team. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of communication to the parents or guardians. And so it sounds as though that there's a lead up to that, and so that they should be informed along the way. So when they get to the suspension part, the parents should have been involved along the way and well knowledgeable. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And last thing, I guess, right now for me anyway, and I appreciate changing the noon time and within the very short notices there. But I was on the board when we switched over the policy with regards to self-reporting and in the presence of, and I think that we had some issues at the time at Portland and Deering of parties or entertainment or what have you happening, and you're guilty by association automatically, and so they wanted to provide an opportunity for the students to come forward to say, yes, I was at Joe Frank's, Henry's house for that party, and let you know that they were there. They may not have been drinking, they may not have been partaking in whatever was going on there, but they're there with their friends. And so while I think we heard that the self-reporting wasn't working, it seems to be really, again, it just seems really, really in the sense of, if you're at a party and you're caught, all of you are going to get this punishment, whether you were drinking or smoking or doing drugs or whatever, everybody because you were present. Is that correct?
That's not quite, I mean, there's
In the
a
presence,
different
though.
level of penalties if you're there and not participating than if you're actually caught drinking. So that's the 10%.
As opposed to 25%.
Did I have that right? It's the 10%
Yes.
piece is if you are there but didn't drink or didn't smoke or whatever, then it's a lesser penalty than if you actually did. But you're correct, there is nothing in there about self-reporting because, again, I think that we found that there were lots of downsides to that, and if, you know, I don't know, Sheila, if you want to share anything on that, Dr. Ahmed, you know, but I think in general, the principals, athletic directors had a very difficult time being able to operationalize that effectively, so I think that our intent with this is to, obviously there is a different level of sanctions if you're at the party but not drinking, but there's no benefit to sort of coming forward and saying, after everybody already has the picture and you know that, and you come and say, oh, yeah, I was at so-and-so's party and, you know, I was drinking, so I get a lesser penalty than the other person that didn't come to report it. Did I capture that?
And then the very last one I have is that we had talked about in the cross-reference, and so thank you for fixing those as well and putting the correct titles, but there was also a contract there, a notation to addendum. So we do not have a contract because I thought, having been a high school parent when my daughter played field hockey, that we had to sign something having to do with behavior along the way with alcohol and drugs, et cetera. And so I'm wondering, it's on the
That's not
cross-reference.
it's not a policy, though, it's just a contract. So we're recommending to completely strike that as a cross-reference policy because it's not a policy.
Okay.
You know, it's a,
Well, it was
it's
an addendum. We had it as an addendum from the sense of that the contract was there, so that you had it with the policy. So I'm just wondering if that's something we can't think about as well as having it available, whether it's in the policy or not, but readily available there so they can see, okay, they're talking about a contract or what have you, here it is. Would that be doable?
I would imagine so, the contract, yeah.
I don't think there's an intent to discontinue the use of contract between the athletes and the school. I think it's just not referenced there because it's not a policy reference. So that's the only reason why it's struck.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I would ask for a public comment. Is there any public comment on policy JICI? Seeing none, is there any board debate? Ms. Thompson?
Again, I want to thank the superintendent and Ms. Prey very much for taking into consideration all of the suggested changes that I brought forward. I agree, and Ms. Prey and I had a healthy debate today, and I think we're on the same page with regards to a lot of this. My biggest concern is the communication to the families about that you have to have, the honor roll doesn't do it anymore, that you have to have the honor roll and we already have, I believe, field hockey and football, they've already started, so therefore this would kick in for, they haven't started yet? Okay, so they're on summer league still? Okay. 2 weeks off. Okay. So I guess what my concern is the articulation to the families about this. And I have to say that, I can say this now, my daughter graduated, that when we were at King Middle School and at Casco Bay, the habits of work, at least from my experience, aren't looked at equally to the academic grade, and that the students are like, well, I got a 3, they're striving for that 3 or that 4, but I got a how of 2. I still made the honor roll, so now we're saying, okay, you're making the honor roll, but now you're going to be penalized too because your habits of work. So I think it's a huge shift for people, and if we don't have a phase-in approach, in my opinion, to families, that something may come back. I mentioned this to my daughter, and she said, Mom, you got to realize that this is going to affect a lot of kids, and there's very few as it is that take part in sports at Casco Bay, and I'm not sure, what the percentages are. Obviously, she was saying it off the cuff. So that's my concern, is we want to always encourage students to do well academically and participate in sports because it's an addition to, and it shows that partaking in co-curricular, their scores go up. And I feel like we're automatically penalizing them without enough information and enough time to assimilate to this. So for that, I'll have to vote against the policy because of the communication, but I do appreciate all the work, and I agree with 99.9. It's just for me is the communication of instituting something without having that conversation with parents and students of here's what it is and this is the repercussions, and understanding it fully, because as you had mentioned, hardly anybody showed up at those meetings and you put out a lot of information. I still think there's some education to be done. Thank you.
Ms. Davis?
Having been a sports parent of kids who played sports from practically the moment they could walk all the way through multiple sports at the high school, middle school and high school level, I think that actually the sports is an opportunity to educate our parents and our students about this, and that it is really a good fit in many ways, because habits of work are something that you find particularly in athletics. It's, coaches are familiar with it. It's not just because you're really good when you're in the game. If you don't put the work in practice and you aren't a good team member, and a lot of habits of work on the field or the court. So I think with it's a great opportunity actually to educate students and families, and it's one that will make sense to them because they understand it in the athletic context. And now we're pushing it into the academic context, and that's a very good thing, because when I work with college students, you see students who do really well, but they don't read that you actually have to participate, show up in class, a lot of habits of work. And just waltzing in at the last class and taking the final and getting an A does not mean that translates to an A in your grade if you are also being measured on participation and attendance and a lot of habits of work. So I think it's it's a place we're going, and I'd say we just go and use the athletics as a really good opportunity to teach, because those parents and those students will be very interested in what it is they need to do to stay on the team and play. So, for that reason, I'll be supporting. I think this is a good way to begin to pull those closer together and really use it as a vehicle for helping our community understand what proficiency-based education is about and how both the academics and the measures of content proficiency also dovetail with the habits of work, and how those will be really critical to our students as they go out into the community, both in work, in their careers, and in academics later on, should they pursue post-secondary schooling.
Ms. Morioni.
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, that it went back and forth many, many times in the curriculum committee, I really do appreciate what Ms. Thompson is saying about habits of work. And thank you to Ms. Davis. It's true that just moving forward with this makes sense. I'm not honestly that worried about, I mean, our students will be taught this. I'm not so sure our teachers are ready to use HOWLs in some of our high schools. And what I mean by that is, you're right, we need to move forward, we need to start somewhere, but I'm starting to think a little bit harder about the fact that teachers are starting to do this, and at the same time, our athletes are going to be the first in the line of feeling the brunt of it if it's not done well right off the bat. Not just athletes, but all of our co-curricular, our drama performers, all of them. So I'm now a little apprehensive about putting in-house at this moment. And I hear Ms. Prey, we've talked about it, we debated it, but I'm feeling a bit reluctant to not necessarily approve the policy, but I would love even consideration of an amendment to possibly even pull HOWLs out right now and give it a year for, again, teachers to learn how to use the rubrics well, to gauge HOWLs, because when HOWLs have been used in our middle schools, our students aren't quite understanding why a teacher gave them a certain number, and honestly, even as a parent, I'm not quite understanding how they got to that either. So I think there's still some learning to be done on both sides, definitely by our parents and students, but more importantly to me, also by the faculty, by our teachers, and athletic directors even, to be able to gauge, okay, did this warrant that punishment? So I'm still on the fence. If somebody can help persuade me a little bit more, but right now I'm kind of leaning more into the camp of finding a way to remove those for this time. Thank you.
Other comments? Okay, Ms. Hudson-Buehler and then Ms. Bendel.
I think it's good to be thoughtful about the process. I mean, it's a big deal, it's a big change. I have a tendency to lean toward the recommendation of the staff in this area. I mean, if the recommendation is that we're ready and we've done some thinking around it, of course we're not going to do it perfectly, but I feel like, the questions and the thoughts are good. It's a good process, it's a good thing to think about, but I don't imagine, I feel confident that we can move forward. I plan to support it.
Ms. Bendel.
I also wanted to echo Ms. Hudson-Buehler's comments that if somebody's been on the curriculum committee, and albeit I wasn't there for all of the meetings where this policy was being discussed, I think the amount of time that we worked on it in committee, the level of review that it went to at the board level, staff's willingness to go back and make, changes and present information so that we have a stronger understanding of how this would be delivered or implemented, I think gives me a great confidence that, this is something that, we are ready to move forward on. And I think that any type of phase-in or delay would probably confuse parents and students even more. I feel like as somebody who's on the board and not working directly in the school, yet have been to educational events, meetings, where professional training is happening, HALS is being discussed, HALS is being used and worked on by staff, and I feel like as a board member, I would not feel comfortable saying, our staff isn't ready, just because I don't really know that work that's happening at the building level. So I have confidence in this policy, in, the staff's ability to run with this. And I think, as stewards, of the public and, representatives to the community for our public schools, if there are things that are happening, we should keep our eyes and ears out. If a rollout is not happening for this initiative, that's impacting, students, we should be on the front lines of, letting the principals, letting our superintendent know. But I don't think that's enough right now to, prevent this good work from being derailed.
Any other comments? Superintendent?
So I think we've taken all of these issues very much into consideration as we thought through this policy. As you've noted, this has gone back and forth a number of times. This is an issue that has been discussed thoroughly, and I believe that our administrative team feels that it is very important to give Howells the level of importance that we want them to have, and that this is one of those places where we have a significant leverage point to be able to ensure that those grades that kids are getting in Howells actually have some weight and give them the gravitas that I think we want them to have. So I don't think that it is going to be a perfect rollout. I think there's going to be a learning curve. There's going to be times that we need to have long conversations with individual students about what were the habits of work that you didn't meet that resulted in you not being academically eligible for sports. But I think it's also important to remember that these policies are not in place as a punishment tool, but as a teaching tool. And so I have the utmost confidence that our staff will not use it as a punishment tool, as in, oh, you failed your Howells, too bad, you had all those A's, now you can't play football. But rather, look, this is something that is also important, and as Ms. Davis described, you can't go through life just taking tests really well. You've got to learn all of these other skills. And I think we hear that over and over and over from employers, from parents, from university folks, that those are some of those soft skills that are really important for our kids to have, and that sometimes they don't have them. And so I think that that's the whole purpose behind Howells, and why we feel strongly enough about this that in spite all of the concerns that have been expressed time and time again, we keep coming back with that's our recommendation and why we stand by it.
Ms. Morioni?
Just want to say thank you to the superintendent and my fellow board members for talking me off the ledge there for a minute. But I think thinking now through, and my kids are heavily involved in sports, but thinking also this could give the coaches a way to help rein in behavior on the teams, and I've seen it come and go, and good and bad behavior. But going out, and I just was thinking about going out and playing against another town. They are our ambassadors, if you will, of our Portland Public Schools, and so if those kids aren't sort of the cream of the crop best, that's where the coach and the athletic director. So my caveat to all of that would be, please let's make sure sure that they are well aware of what we're about to do here, so that they can inform the athletes, even during tryouts, which are coming up in a couple weeks for these fall sports, that they are really aware and be able to say, you know, this is what you're signing up for, kids. You know, if you're really ready to commit, this is what you're going to also have to make sure you're doing. So that they can vocalize it. Athletic director we can also be speaking from the same, So I was going to say songbook, but I was trying to think of an athletic analogy. But anyhow, so yeah, playbook. That's it. Thank you.
Song and play.
Playbook. So anyhow, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. All those in favor of revising policy JICI, Athletic and Co-curricular Code of Conduct for middle and high school students, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the affirmative, and all those opposed, Ms. Thompson in the negative. Consideration and action to approve the resolution entitled Resolution to Authorize Lease Purchase of Computers and Related Equipment in the principal amount of $640,000 be approved in form presented to this meeting, and that a copy of said resolution be included in the minutes of this meeting. Is there a motion? Ms. Davis, seconded by Ms. Vendel. Would the superintendent like to speak to the motion?
Sure. At the June 20th meeting, you approved and authorized us to approve a lease purchase for the one-to-one high school devices. Subsequent to that approval, in the course of finalizing the agreement with Androscoggin Bank, our council advised that we needed to change the format of the approval resolution, and the resolution before you does that. So, Alicia, I don't know if you want to explain this any further.
So that is correct. The first approval was to approve the lease award and the terms, and essentially authorize the interest that we'll pay. And this approves that we can enter into a tax-exempt agreement and that we will use the funds for the stated purpose. And going forward, we will ensure these are all wrapped up into one resolution.
Just on that point, we didn't realize that we needed that second resolution, otherwise it would have all been
Correct.
part of the original package, so.
Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the motion? Seeing none, is there any board discussion on the motion? Ms. Thompson?
I just want to thank Alicia for explaining a lot of the terminology to me on this. It's some of it's kind of Greek, in the sense of you really have to be in depth with a lot of the tax law, et cetera. When I was reading through it, I said, good golly, and what's the United States have to do with this and that? And so I appreciate her explaining it to me, and I appreciate the signature of the board chair as well, because I think when we're going into any kind of agreements or resolutions, that if the board's voting on something, that we should also have the board chair's signature stating that the board was in support of it. So thank you for adding that as well. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, I would call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the resolution entitled Resolution to Authorize Lease Purchase of Computers and Related Equipment in the principal amount of $640,000 be approved in form presented to this meeting, and that a copy of said resolution be included in the minutes of this meeting. Please indicate. It's unanimous. Moving into new business, we have a first read on the Portland Public Schools Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. And in personnel, we have consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed. Is there a motion? Ms. Vendel, seconded by Ms. Hatzenbuehler. Would the superintendent like to speak to the personnel items?
Personnel items. Today, I'm happy to recommend two outstanding candidates for to fill important positions within our leadership team. First, we have Dawn Gersh, who I'm recommending as the new assistant principal at Ocean Avenue. Dawn comes to us from Falmouth Middle School, where she has been a counselor, and prior to that, Dawn also worked as a counselor in Illinois. Dawn is already a part of the Portland Public Schools family. Her husband, Bob, is a math teacher at Portland High School, and their 3 children have gone through the PPS system, including their youngest, who's a rising junior at Portland High School. I'd also like to recommend Greg Palmer, who emerged as the top candidate following an intensive selection process to replace Ira Waltz as the principal at Deering High School. Mr. Palmer has led Falmouth High School since 2010. Successes during his tenure include the school's achieving the best standardized test scores of any high school in Maine in math and English language arts, as well as innovative programming and initiatives such as Latin honors and diploma endorsements in STEM and the arts, as well as the creation of a program to bring more students from other countries to study at the school. Prior to being at Falmouth, Mr. Palmer worked as a principal in the Sears Sports School District, MSAD 56, from 2002 to 2010, and during his tenure there, he held the position of high school principal, middle school principal, and originally dean of students, and he led the school through an intensive improvement effort that culminated with the school being recognized as one of the most improved in the state. Before that, he was a special education teacher in Brewer School District from 1994 to 2002. And I would like to thank the many individuals who were involved in the selection process identifying these great additions to our Portland public school system.
And those are 2 included in the whole slate, but those 2 are with us tonight.
Yes. And so we also have an extensive slate of teachers that are being brought forward as recommendations for appointment, ranging from probationary teachers who are becoming contract teachers, as well as probationary teachers that are being hired for the first time. And so all of those are positions that were considered as part of the budget, and they are all, we have an outstanding crop of candidates. Our teachers, our principals, our assistant principals, and their teacher teams have been working really hard to identify outstanding candidates, and I feel really, really good about the group of teachers that we're bringing.
Are there any questions on the motion? Ms. Thompson?
I just have a question for the superintendent. I was asking our assistant superintendent behind us and our HR director. While I can't find it in the meeting minutes, I remember Ms. Soroy, the assistant principal from Hall, being here and coming to talk to us at the microphone. So I'm wondering why she came up and talked to us at the microphone if we didn't already vote on that. But it's not reflected in the meeting minutes. But
I believe because she was here for the more improvement plan presentation or something else that more was there for, and so we took the opportunity to introduce her, but she was not officially, had not been officially recommended at that board meeting. So I think I notified you guys before the board meeting that Sarah was our candidate, but we did not have time to get her into the packet. I believe that's right. Is that right, Barb? From the previous meeting, so she was approved at that meeting? So I stand corrected. She's already been approved. So we'll strike her from this slate.
So the slate now has that removed. Okay. And where this is a personnel matter, there is no public comment. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the personnel items listed, please indicate. It's unanimous.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if Mrs. Gersh or Mr. Palmer would like to address the board? Please limit your remarks to 30 minutes or less.
Perfect. That's about what I have prepared. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. I started my relationship with Portland Public Schools as a parent and a volunteer, and I'm so thrilled to be a leader. And I am looking forward to bringing my expertise and my experience to make a great district even better. And I've spent my last month at Ocean Ave amazed at engaged students and very, very committed teachers who are there all the time, all summer. So I'm already having a great experience, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. We're happy to have you. Welcome.
Yeah, Dawn said that now I have an hour, 59 minutes. So first I'll say Dawn Gersh is the best. She worked with my son in Falmouth and with a lot of families, and she's just awesome. So I'm really excited to come to Portland with her. So I have two metaphors. One, the process was really thorough, and I appreciate that. If I was a car, I think that the tires have been kicked, people have looked under the hood, and we've driven around the block a couple of times at this point, and I really appreciate that. It was clearly people took it really seriously, and I got to know a lot about Portland Public Schools as well as people were getting to know more about me. So I appreciate Superintendent Botanis leading that process and that it was so thorough. And second of all, for me, like the high school principalship has to be about something, right? And for me, I always think about this image that I heard the great John Updike once talk about this room that we all end up in at some point in our lives, and for our kids, it's at the end of high school. It's a circular room, and the walls are completely made out of doors. There are thousands of doors, and every door has a separate key, and not all kids have all the keys. No kid will have all the keys, actually. They'll all have a collection of them. And but they don't know which key they need. They think they don't know, but they don't. They might not. And their parents aren't quite clear, and we're not sure either. And so our job is to get them in that room with as many possible keys as we can. And so all the work that we're going to be doing in Daring, which is already a great high school, but all the work we'll be doing going forward is trying to get kids into that room with as many keys as possible. It should all be geared to that for me. So I am just so excited. I'm really happy to be principal at Daring High School and work with Sheila and Derek and Dr. Ahmed and everyone I've met so far. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
welcome.
Thanks.
There is no board focus on educational issues tonight. We will be having a workshop following the board meeting on the budget. And where it is before the hour of 10 o'clock, I would call for a public comment on any items not listed on this evening's agenda.
Stephen Sharp of Salem Street. I would just like to first comment on you stealing two fine people from the town of Falmouth, and I just think it's interesting that we've captured two of them from Falmouth. So I'm not actually commenting on that personnel item. I just thought it was interesting. Also want to note that I've been following school board matters for several years, and tonight is the first time I've ever heard the term house. I guess I've just, I don't follow the curriculum side that closely, but I've just never heard the reference to it, and I'm surprised to see it. I did a Google search and found a 2009 document from Casco Bay, so apparently it's something they've been doing for years, and I just never even heard about it. I do want to speak specifically to two things regarding Budget and Finance. One is the health center funding that it was listed in the newspaper, and there was wailing and gnashing of teeth that we're losing this health center funding money, but yet it wasn't, other than a question asked about it, it wasn't brought up tonight as a crisis of the school department. But yet, we weren't even told how much the school department is losing, so we have no clue how much the state took away. At the same time, the state gave us an additional $1.7 million to spend on the schools. So I don't think it was quite the crisis that was listed in the newspaper, because they did provide the schools, I'm sorry, they provided the schools with an additional $2.7 million. The schools had, you had already allocated $1 million of that 2.7 in the budget system, cycle process. So but we do need to make clear that the schools got an additional $2.7 million beyond what there was planned for. And so whatever this additional money or that was removed in the budget cycle, the state budget process, from the school health centers, you know, is quite frankly, I believe, pretty small in comparison to the it was referenced in the finance director's presentation that there are three different options, really. She referenced 6, but 3 of them are essentially spend more money. And one is to provide tax relief, and the third is to put it in a reserve fund. I would just like to encourage the board to work as much as possible in the providing tax relief option in your deliberations on how to utilize the additional $1.7 million that the state provided for education in the schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, I will close public comment and call for a motion for adjournment. Ms. Hatzenbuehler, seconded by Ms. Davis. All those in favor? It's unanimous. We are adjourned.